Hi there, this is Josh from Literary Gladiators, and today I'm here with a book haul. A few weeks ago I was going out with friends, and I suggested that we pay a visit to Second Time Books in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. And while I was there, I picked up even more books for my collection. I first visited Second Time Books back in June and had myself a time, and so I felt that now was the time to go back and see what I can find there. And I found 7 books. I found 3 nonfiction and 4 fiction, so I'm going to sort the haul out in that matter. From here on out, I'm also going to label my store-specific book hauls a bit differently. Instead of referring to them as parts when I pay multiple visits, I think I'm just going to make mention to the fact that it was a visit. For instance, as opposed to part 2, this is going to be visit 2, or visit number 2, because I don't want people to feel that they have to go back and watch the first part before they come to this part. Each of them should be treated separately, and I think that people can get a lot out of both visits. So let's get into this particular visit that I made to Second Time Books. They have an extraordinary nonfiction section, especially when it comes to historical nonfiction. And the first thing that I got was Jefferson's Second Revolution, The Election Crisis of 1800 and the Triumph of Republicanism by Susan Dunn. And this has to do with the 1800 presidential election between incumbent Federalist nominee John Adams and Democratic Republican challenger Thomas Jefferson. At this point in time, both men were respectable individuals. They both established themselves, both signed the Declaration of Independence. They were both under George Washington's cabinet. John Adams is the vice president, and Jefferson was Secretary of State for a few years. But this also explores the fierceness that came within the election and the loopholes that included the tie between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. Burr was Jefferson's running mate, but they would vote for them separately and not together. So there was a lot to decipher, and ultimately Jefferson would come out on top. But it would create a greater strain within the relationship between Adams and Jefferson, and it'll be interesting to learn more, especially since Dunn is a professor in humanities at Williams College. Next thing that I got was something that I was looking for quite some time, and that is Ike's Bluff, President Eisenhower's Secret Battle to Save the World by Evan Thomas. I came across this book at another bookstore, but it was in large print, and I wanted something that had print that was regular size. But I'm interested in learning a bit more about President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was a World War II general and then would go on to serve 2 terms from 1953 to 1961. I have another book of his, Eisenhower in War and Peace, and I'll be interested to see what this has to say, because from what I read in the header, Eisenhower's portrayed as this grandfatherly figure that was interested in golf and watercolor painting. Later in his life, he would one of his favorite pastimes was painting by numbers. But as president, there's a lot that people overlook that to which he contributed to the country. One of which was the creation of the highway system and how that really shot up during his administration. It also talks about the impact that he had with the government in not just America, in Washington, D.C., but also, or not just in Washington, D.C., but also in Beijing and Moscow. And I'll be interested to learn a lot more about Eisenhower, especially since he was a political outsider. He was a general, never held any prior office. He wasn't a senator or a governor or representative. Next one that I got was the first in a historical nonfiction trilogy, and that is The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt by Edmund Morris. And this explores Theodore Roosevelt's early life, from his birth in 1858 until his assumption of the presidency following William McKinley's assassination in 1901. And this explores that early part of his life, how he grew up a sick child and how he lost his first wife at a very early point, how he was a war hero, and also how he became the vice president to William McKinley, because he didn't become his vice president until McKinley's second term. I also have Colonel Roosevelt, which is the third in the series, and then now I just have to get Theodore Rex, which is the second in the series. Now I'm going to move on to the fiction that I got. I only got one novel. The rest are shorter works, but the novel that I got was right on top of my wish list, and it was at a very reasonable price. The only other place that I found it was on Amazon, and it was double digits, maybe even triple digits. It wasn't something that I would spend on a book, even if it was on the top of my wish list. And that is The Sand Pebbles by Richard McKenna. I first became aware of this because it was adapted into a film starring Steve McQueen, and it is my grandfather's all-time favorite movie. But this particular book has to do with a man named Jake Holman. Holman's serving on he's serving in the Navy on the Yangtze River in China, and it has to do with not just the physical events that take place, but also his more the emotional struggles that are going on within Jake Holman. And I'm really interested to pick this up and read it. I'll definitely watch the film, but I would like to read this first, unless my grandfather pulls me aside and tells me that I'm going to watch the whole movie before I have the opportunity to pick up this book. So I guess I should be picking up this book very soon. Next thing that I got was the short stories of Ernest Hemingway. And I feel that while Hemingway is not a writer that has grabbed my attention at the moment, I feel that he's somebody that I want to get into a little bit more and read a bit more often. We went over Hills Like White Elephants, which is the one I was most familiar with, and we just went over Snows of Kilimanjaro. And I've read a few of his other short stories, and it leads me to want to read more. And especially since Larry on our show is an enthusiast for Hemingway, I can imagine that it's part of our game plan to go over a little bit more of what he has to offer. Next thing that I got is something that I'm really ecstatic that I came across, and that is an anthology of Scandinavian literature. this is the first time I came across an anthology of this nature. I have a collection of Norwegian fairy tales, and I have Scandinavian literature within other anthologies, but this includes works from Hans Christian Andersen, Halldor Laxness, who I just read something from, August Strindberg, the playwright, and so many more from the period of the Vikings until the 1900s, the 20th century. And there's just a bunch of gems in here. It looks like there's going to be a lot of reading material that will grant me the opportunity to become familiar with Scandinavian writers that have crossed my or that have flown over my radar here or there. It's just like with 75 Short Masterpieces, I came across writers that you really don't hear from, but they really made quite an impact. And the last thing that I got is the classic tales, 4,000 Years of Jewish Lore, which was put together by Ellen Frankel. And this includes different tales that are very frequently associated with Judaism. And some of the tales, it includes the beginning of time, and it also includes the one that I came across when I was doing a world religions assignment on Judaism, and that was Abraham and the Idols. There's some more, there's tales featuring David and Solomon, the sages of the Talmud, and there are some of them, they come off as being, they come off with fable-like titles. The Bird That Sang to a Bridegroom, The Jar of Tears, there's The Werewolf. It has that feel that, it has that kind of folklore feel to it, and I think that tales like these are really important when it comes to capturing what a particular religion or culture was like. And already, here is all of the nonfiction that I got. And here is all of the fiction that I got on my trip to Second Time Books. It was quite a trip. It was it was quite a visit, and I definitely want to go back. Thank you for tuning into this book haul. I hope you keep tuning into some more videos, and for now, and as always, I encourage you to keep reading.